The podcast opens with a conversation between Louise Perry, a conservative journalist critical of the sexual revolution in pornography, and Bonnie Blue, a prominent UK sex worker and OnlyFans personality. Louise's interest in meeting Bonnie stems from a curiosity about how Bonnie has navigated the sex industry without apparent psychological trauma, contrasting sharply with the narratives of distress that Louise has heard from countless other women in the industry. Bonnie explains that her decision is rooted in choice, happiness, and personal agency rather than trauma, noting that while many sex workers suffer, her experience has been different due to her personality and approach. Louise situates herself philosophically as coming from a critical vantage point toward the sexual revolution and the industry's impact on culture and individuals. Bonnie, meanwhile, embodies the extreme end of sexual liberation, taking the values of sex positivity and independence to their logical conclusions. The conversation sets the stage for examining the diverging worldviews on sex work, autonomy, and the broader implications for society. A significant portion of the discussion explores Bonnie's unique psychological makeup and emotional resilience, which set her apart from the majority of sex workers who experience trauma or distress. Bonnie describes herself as someone with a simple brain, yet remarkable endurance, both physical and emotional. She recounts how she prepares for and manages intense sexual scenes, including a challenging gangbang in the U.S. involving 50 men with vigorous physicality. Despite the demanding circumstances, she actively communicates her boundaries and requests, underscoring that consent and self-advocacy are central to her experience. Bonnie's emotional threshold also includes an uncommon lack of repulsion toward the variety of men she encounters, whether in terms of looks, body types, or hygiene. This non-judgmental attitude is informed by years of interaction with diverse clients, many of whom face life challenges she empathizes with. She acknowledges that while she might not be attracted to every man, she rarely finds anyone so repulsive as to recoil physically, a stark divergence from the majority of women's responses to such situations. Bonnie redefines sex in pragmatic terms as a hobby rather than something necessarily sacred or tied to deep emotional bonds. She acknowledges that before entering the sex industry, she had a low sexual body count, with sex largely confined to relationships. However, her perspective shifted dramatically as she embraced sexual work. Sex, for her, is about pleasure, independence, and enjoyment without the traditional baggage of meaning or consequence. In discussing this reframing, Bonnie reflects on the role of reliable contraception and how it has detached sex from procreation, enabling more casual and liberatory attitudes. She maintains that meaningful sex remains possible, but that it is equally valid to experience sex as a form of recreation. This stance challenges conventional cultural taboos and offers insight into the evolving landscape of feminine sexuality and agency. Bonnie candidly reveals that her initial motivation for entering sex work was financial freedom and lifestyle flexibility rather than pure sexual exploration. She recounts her prior work experience in less flexible jobs, such as recruitment, retail, and waitressing, and how she sought a life that allowed more control over her time and income. The sex industry, particularly through platforms like OnlyFans, provided an accelerated path to wealth and autonomy. Yet Bonnie clarifies that the monetary aspect is just one component of her satisfaction, alongside the confidence boost she receives from positive interactions and the lifestyle of travel and family time it affords. This blend of financial independence and personal fulfillment illustrates that sex work can be a complex and multifaceted career choice for certain individuals. Bonnie's fame and notoriety bring both advantages and challenges. While she enjoys the adoration and support of many fans in person, including women and families who seek photos and expressions of admiration, she also faces extensive online hate and misinformation. Bonnie appears to be emotionally impervious to negativity, embodying a rare degree of confidence and rejection of social judgment that Louise identifies as extraordinary. This public spotlight extends into the practical realm, where Bonnie must navigate security concerns and the difficulty of maintaining privacy. The podcast touches on the potential repercussions for her personal life and future, especially regarding the possibility of motherhood and how exposure and digital permanence might affect any children she may have. A contentious topic examines Bonnie's explicit embrace of transactional sexuality and her blunt attitude toward infidelity. She openly discusses how her events attract men whose relationships may be strained or failing due to lack of intimacy or communication. Bonnie sees her role not as a destroyer of marriages, but as a symptom or even solution to marital problems where sex and connection are lacking. The conversation acknowledges the complexity of cheating, distinguishing between emotional affairs and physical acts devoid of emotional attachment. Bonnie's perspective reframes infidelity in terms of unmet needs and honest agency, challenging societal notions of fidelity and female sexual morality. Louise raises concerns about the potential normalization of such behaviors and their ripple effects on cultural attitudes toward relationships. Both guests critique the current sex education landscape for its inadequacy in preparing young people for healthy sexual experiences. Bonnie advocates for more transparent discussions around consent, preference articulation, and physical boundaries within porn and educational contexts. She highlights how her own content deliberately includes discussions about limits and consent, contrary to typical porn's polished and unrealistic portrayals. The episode also delves into the challenges of regulating pornography, balancing accessibility with safety and informed viewership. Bonnie supports stricter consent verification on platforms, but acknowledges the practical difficulties posed by underground markets and anonymous sites. The dialogue touches on the paradox that while pornography can offer outlets that potentially reduce sexual violence, it also risks escalating extreme or harmful desires and expectations in some viewers. Louise describes Bonnie as the reductio ad absurdum, or living embodiment of the sexual revolution's extremes. Bonnie represents a political and cultural fault line where sexual freedom, capitalist enterprise, and female autonomy intensely intersect. This makes her polarizing, with many unable to reconcile support for sexual liberation with unease at Bonnie's unapologetic commodification and public spectacle. The debate raises questions about whether Bonnie's visibility advances feminism or exposes its contradictions. Bonnie's unapologetic embrace of transactional sex, material success, and rejection of victimhood challenge traditional feminist narratives of empowerment, victimization, and modesty. Both participants acknowledge that Bonnie's example forces society to confront complex realities about choice, agency, and cultural norms around sex and money. Bonnie's relationship with other sex workers is complicated. She notes widespread animosity from others in the industry who view her as disruptive to traditional content and fan bases. While she has disrupted fake or manufactured narratives, her success introduces pressures on other workers to escalate performance in ways that may be physically or emotionally harmful. Louise highlights that many sex workers suffer trauma and distress, and Bonnie's exceptional psychological resilience cannot be generalized. The conversation calls attention to the dangers of replicating Bonnie's model blindly, acknowledging that attempts to copy her approach often result in harm for others. This underscores the diversity and complexity within the sex worker community. The prospect of motherhood and family life introduces new dimensions to Bonnie's narrative. She expresses a desire for children and an intent to be transparent about her profession with her potential offspring to avoid surprises or shame. The emotional and social repercussions of her fame on her family are anticipated with both realism and hope. The debate also touches on Bonnie's sense of social responsibility, especially related to financial domination and exploitative relationships. While she claims agency over her choices and rejects victim narratives, she sets boundaries around behaviors she finds morally uncomfortable, such as draining partners' accounts. This reveals the nuanced, ethical terrain sex workers navigate regarding empowerment, consent, and exploitation.